Hey folks, welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. You know, if I didn't do these podcasts and warn as many people as I can to the dangers this country faces, particularly from the governing class and specifically the communists who have taken over the Democrat Party, then I would feel like I was acting like Nero, fiddling while Rome burned. Now, I know that many of you, in fact, most of you, don't have any interest in being as engaged in the political process of this country as I am, but I can assure you that in its current trajectory, you will be. And you will be as engaged as if you were sitting in the emergency room waiting for the doctor to come out and tell you whether or not your child was going to live or die. That's just how serious our social and societal illness is. If you knew the treachery and the treason of those on the left, the Democrats, and what they have been engaged in this country, you would take to the streets. It would look like a scene from the old Frankenstein movies where the townsfolk lit torches and picked up their pitchforks and marched upon Frankenstein's castle to get rid of him. So with that, I will once again treat you to another installment, as I did last week, as to the Democrats and what they're giving you and the choice that they're giving you. You heard me talk about the pervert in Maine, who is the Democrat running for U.S. Senate, Graham Plattner. And I got as explicit as I dared do with all his perversions. And some people said, well, do you have to be quite so graphic? Well, my response is, if you don't shock the people with the brutal truth, they will always find a way to justify accepting what is wrong and evil. And that's as blunt as you can get. Yeah, if you don't smear it in people's faces and tell them just how bad it is, oh, they'll make up an excuse and they'll find a way to just do nothing and just be indolent. It's called what I termed in my book, America's Systemic Psychosis, toxic tolerance. Too many in this country are like the three wise monkeys. They see nothing, they hear nothing, they say nothing. And when the big tiger of communism comes to take everything away from you and persecute you and execute you, you will deserve every bit of it. And I will have no sympathy. In the day and age in which we are living, where there is more access to information than there has ever been, there is no excuse for people to be so stupid. And even God has warned in Scripture that on Judgment Day, no one will be with excuse. You see, you will not be able to plead ignorance on the day of the Lord. And if you don't know what that term means, then it proves my point. So let me give you another example of what the people in New Jersey just did. Adam Hamaway, a controversial candidate who had previously volunteered with an al-Qaeda-linked group, has won the Democratic primary for retiring Representative Bonnie Coleman's New Jersey seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Hamaway had a 1994 internship with the Benevolence International Foundation in Bosnia and his association with the infamous blind Sheikh. You mean you don't know who he is? Well, then you are like the idiots and morons in New Jersey. The blind Sheikh was the mastermind of the first attempt to blow up the World Trade Towers. The 9/11 Commission report described the now-defunct Benevolence International Foundation's operation in Bosnia as part of an impressive array of offices that covertly provided financial and other support for terrorist activities by Osama bin Laden in the 1990s. Hamaway was previously linked to al-Qaeda groups. In fact, reports have surfaced that when the blind Sheikh was put on trial for the trade tower bombings, Hamaway was the interpreter and he lied. So look who's supporting this guy and who their friends are. They are all communist folks. In fact, Hassan Piker, who I just mentioned, is an avowed communist and said he wants to see blood flow in the streets. That is your blood. This is just the latest addition to the demonic core of the Democrat Party. Now you've got the likes of Tallarico in Texas, who preaches that God is non-binary and that there are 6 genders. Another Democrat. And then you have Graham Plattner in Maine, who's not only undergoing therapy, but is a sexual pervert, as his own post revealed. You can look at the rest of the Democrat field and essentially what we thought we had defeated in the fall of the Soviet Union back in the 1990s, we were unaware that the communism had metastasized in this country. The main tumors are all concentrated in the blue states. And when you analyze the religious makeup of the blue states, they are a majority majority atheist. And as you should already know from not only history, but what you should have been taught in school, communism promotes the suppression and eradication of religion. It wants to be your God, and that is exactly what a liberal leftist Democrat Communist Party is. Every one of these descriptive terms have their basis in fact. Now, you've heard me talk many times with regard to a Civil War 2.0, and I don't know how it can be avoided given the fact that those on the left are so motivated and those on the right, should I say, just the average American, are relatively so indifferent to the danger they face. I simply don't see how our union of 50 states can remain together. It defies the laws of non-contradiction, and with that, I mean that just as fire and water cannot occupy the same space at the same time, freedom-loving Americans cannot coexist with what is going on in the blue states. Just like I mentioned about what is going on in New York. People of that political persuasion cannot tolerate dissent. And while the media and the Democrats screamed about how unfair it was for some red states to gerrymander their congressional districts, no one in the media ever mentioned that of the 9 states in the Northeast that have 0 Republican representatives in Congress. This is why you have to know your facts. So many on the so-called right side of the political spectrum are suicidal. And as I have often said, we expect evil to do evil things, but we don't expect good people to do nothing. And so at the end of the day, who do you fault and cast blame? The blame belongs to the so-called good people doing nothing and thus deserving of the profound misery and suffering that will come their way. Now, moving on to another topic, while we're on the matter of New Jersey, here's a headline that I loved seeing. Samsung flees New Jersey for Texas, costing the Garden State 1,000 jobs. In fact, we are seeing the exodus in New York, Illinois, and California. And in fact, 25% of California's population has already left, and what is left, nearly 30% of that population, is foreign-born and have no connection with our culture. Moreover, they get paid benefits from your tax dollars, so they are perfectly comfortable with growing communism in California. All of the blue states have one thing in common. They are majority atheist, liberal, leftist Democrats and mentally irrational. Just like in New York, they're getting rid of the term father and mother. Imagine that. Don't waste your time arguing with them. We are well past the time of trying to reason with these people, and well past the time of words. Even Scripture is pretty clear about that you don't argue with fool. And I always add to that, lest you become one yourself. It's time for action. The left con you with false compassion and suicidal empathy to create fake problems in search of a solution, giving excuse for the need of new programs. Funding by who? Taxpayer monies. And then they are fraudulently managed by people that the Democrats pick so that the money flows back into the Democrat Party. That's exactly what is happening in the U.S. and what happened with USAID. That is also what was and is happening with Medicare and Medicaid in the billions, as we have already seen in Minneapolis and Minnesota and California, where billions were flowing through the fraudulent programs to Democrats. Now that the Trump administration has caught the thieves and is cutting off their money, the Republicans currently have on hand approximately $100 million more than the Democrats. You see, the Democrats were only being funded by the fraud. In fact, the Democrats are in debt. You see, folks, because you fell for the lies of the Democrats and thought them so honest and compassionate, you were being gamed, snookered, conned, and robbed of your hard-earned monies. Your loved ones never got the benefits and medical care that they needed, because it was all going to fund the Democrats and Democrat causes. Frankly, I think we need to take one of the blue states and turn it into a penal colony to house all the corrupted Democrats from around the country who have scammed the system. But getting back to the main point, Samsung is just another example of where companies are leaving these high taxation states and going to red states where sanity prevails. Once again, I repeat, we are in the midst of a cold Civil War 2.0, and unless there is some miraculous change, I do not see our national union continuing. There can be no coexistence with the left, and in fact, that is dangerous because there is no justice that can be had in those venues. New York, New Jersey, Illinois, California, Washington, D.C. are so judicially corrupt that a fair trial cannot be had. You risk even traveling to those states. We no longer have a shared bond. Once again, I will remind everybody that of the 9 states that make up the Northeast, and particularly the New England area, there are 0 Republican representatives in Congress, even though 35 to 40% of the states there are registered Republicans. The Democrats have made sure that there are no Republican representatives, yet they complain when Republicans decide to fight back and start gerrymandering in some of the red states. Okay, now moving on, it appears that Spencer Pratt in Los Angeles has lost his bid to be a candidate for mayor, as the 2 communist candidates for mayor, Karen Bass and Councilwoman Rahman, will take first place and second place. So the way in which California rigs an election is that only the 2 top vote getters get to run against each other in the general election. And the way that you rig this is that both the top 2 are assured to be Democrats, and so the people in Los Angeles do not have a choice between a Democrat and a Republican. This country is built on a 2-party system, but the Democrats have eliminated that by making it nearly impossible for a Republican to be in the race. The Republicans are almost always blocked out in California. This is not our Republican form of government, and the Supreme Court should have stopped this years ago. But that's typical of our judicial system. They're either letting criminals off or they fail to take action to stop the slide into communism. Unfortunately, the flaw in our country and particularly our judiciary and how they treat our Constitution, they do it as if it were a suicide pact. Once the dictators take over in this country, there will be no America to save us, particularly like we did for those in Venezuela. This is it, folks. Once America is gone, freedom in the world is gone. There's nobody to come rescue us. Now back to California. 25 to 35% of California is foreign born and has no concept of democracy or a republic, and frankly, they could care less because they're being paid welfare payments by you. So as much as I would like to forget about California, and if I could, divorce it from the rest of the union and then afterwards declare it a security threat to the country and take it over, replacing all the institutions with people that believe in a republic, it seems clear that that's not going to happen. And it's even more hopeless because 25% of California's sane population has already left the state in the last decade or 2. Folks, the only answer to communism and socialism, which are truly synonymous terms, is revolution or military conflict. That is why they want your guns. The disease has spread too far and too deep in California to fix it. The very wealthy hide behind gated communities and insulate themselves from the chaos. But folks, you're not insulated from California's problems because the Democrats in Congress, when California finally goes bankrupt, will cause the federal government to bail them out, and they'll do it with your tax dollars. So in the end, you end up paying for it. What happens in one part of the country, folks, does affect the rest of us. And just as we fought a civil war 160 years ago, when the Confederates seceded from the Union because they nullified the federal law, as the sanctuary blue states and communities are doing today, remember, the Civil War of 160 years ago cost 600,000 lives to save the Union. History is repeating itself, and when you look at the blue states in this country, they are all under the total control of the Communist Confederate Democrat Party. The Democrat Party hasn't changed, folks, and I talked about that in my last podcast, telling you all the things that they've done, but yet they blame everybody else for it. Now, how far has this gone? Once again, let me remind you of the 9 states in the Northeast. There are 0 Republican representatives in Congress. We have the same problem in Illinois and Minnesota, Washington State, Oregon, California, Colorado, and New Mexico. This cancer has spread, and the common denominator is atheism. No one is safe, and our Constitution will not save us. Even in the red state of Kentucky, we have a Nancy Pelosi-style governor in Andy Beshear who wants to be your next president. He is pretending to be a moderate and is using the old Jimmy Carter playbook of using naive Christians to get into office. Likewise, James Tallarico is doing the same in Texas, heretically twisting Scripture to hide his radicalism. Tallarico and Bashir are using suicidal empathy cloaked in twisted interpretations of Scripture to gain the vote of gullible Christians. Or maybe I should say people who think they are Christians. To them, I would say, go look up Matthew 7:22-23 in the Bible. So many Christians are easily deceived today because they are part of the crowd that would rather die than think. And as Einstein once said, 5% of the people think, 10% of the people think they think, and 85% of the people would rather die than think. And that is exactly what is happening and what will happen. At any rate, Governor Bashir of Kentucky, thankfully, is term limited, and his damage in Kentucky has been limited by the fact that the Republicans have had a supermajority in the legislature. But our fake governor tries to take credit for what really the Republican legislature has done. Nevertheless, the cancer that is quietly growing in Kentucky is found not only in the governor's office, but with the teachers' unions and the judiciary. Fortunately, we recently eliminated one of our problems in Kentucky with the defeat of Thomas Massie, who initially was elected in a solidly red district. And this is what happens with uninformed people who are dangerous, particularly when they have the power of the vote. Another problem in Kentucky has been the Libertarian Party. The fools that belong to that somehow believe that it is more constitutional, when in fact it was Democrats out in California back during President Nixon's time that formed the Libertarian Party. However, libertarianism is as much a cult as is Scientology. So to wrap this section up, I don't care what state you're in. If it was possible to do an MRI or a CAT scan of your entire state, you would probably find little elements or specks of communist cells that need to be eradicated. So wherever you are, you need to be involved, as there is no hiding from this. You either catch the communist cancer early or you will die from it. Unless this country takes radical action in the form of a political chemotherapy, a movement, that means a movement of millions of citizens, your republic will die, and you will too. Well, moving on to another topic, and here's a headline for you. Director Steven Spielberg says the new movie Disclosure Day about aliens will leave Christians questioning their faith in God. Well, Spielberg doesn't know the meaning of faith, which is neither blind nor just a feeling. Now, with all the computer graphics and cinematography and technology today, as we have already discovered, with Photoshop and other technological means, we can make anything look real, as we are already experiencing with AI. We are also prone to live in fantasies and delusions, which is so easy when our soul is empty. Now, Spielberg is full of speculation, has no more information and no more evidence than the rest of us do as to what the true nature is of what people now refer to as UFOs. If anything should give you a clue, it's the first initial of that anagram UFO, that is unidentified. It's unknown. And within the alien spectrum, it's consoling to the lost and the unbelievers to fantasize about a universe filled with other beings, because it lessens the anxiety that they have in thinking that we are so unique that there has to be a higher being to which we will have to answer and give an account. Now, these movies are fun, but not to be taken seriously, obviously. We have a Bible and thousands of years of history identifying spirits of the air and demons and demonic possessions and influence. Scripture also tells us of a time near the end where we will come under a powerful delusion, where truth is hidden from us as a judgment unfolds. We will be given over to reprobate minds, incapable of any discernment. And just as so many called advanced civilizations of the past collapsed and disappeared, we are no different. I have no fear of true Christians questioning their faith, as Spielberg suggests. Folks, I'm less concerned about extraterrestrial aliens and more concerned about Satan's presence in the many forms it takes today. The major one being Islam. That is Satan's greatest footprint in the world and the greatest delusion. We also see the delusion manifesting itself in women voters who support a communist Democrat party in greater numbers than men. And it is that party, the leftists, the communists, the progressives, and the like, who women find so appealing, and it is that party who supports Islam, who If it does take over, women will be considered second-class citizens, lose the right to vote, and will end up wearing burqas and can be beaten and punished by their husbands. I mean, it's just absolutely bizarre how sometimes women think and how people think and the consequences of their votes. We have far more to be concerned about than aliens in the Spielberg's movie and extraterrestrials. It's amazing that all these feminists today who thump their chest yelling, "I am woman, hear me roar," and they're giving support to the very people that will oppress them. Frankly, folks, that's, I guess, what you would call a fitting punishment for being so stupid. And when we have suicidal Jews in New York, the majority of which voted for communist Zoran Mondani, who is also a Muslim and just recently refused to attend the parade in celebration of Jews and Israel, which has been a tradition for decades, these suicidal Jews lend their support to the very man and his beliefs and his religion that if he had total control, he would kill them. So to Christians, I say, work out your salvation each and every day in fear and trembling of the Lord, as the time is upon us when so many are falsely assured and would rather assume all is well instead of doing the more laborious task of investigation, study, and contemplation. There are no extraterrestrials, only demons which have been around since the garden and the fall of man. As Scripture tells us on Judgment Day, no one will be with excuse, and while many are called, few will enter into the kingdom. Enjoy the fantasy movie, but keep your head about you, as we have real problems to confront, and we are not going to be saved by benevolent aliens. Now let's address one more example of how God has given us over to depraved mind. New York Bill A8382A, that's a long number, replaces mother and father with gestating parent in family law. Here's what it means for divorce cases. This is what the Democrat Party has become. They twist terms and change the meaning of words. And what's next? Are they going to require you to have your children call you gestating parent instead of mom? The dictionary is insufficient to provide a pejorative enough term for these people. I've often used God-hating hedonistic reprobates as a term. In simple terms, that means they are hell-bound, which is relatively easy to discern given what the Bible tells you exactly who they are. But the more important question is why would any heaven-bound person vote to place such people in office unless they themselves are falsely assured of their own salvific condition, that is, salvation? Frankly, there is a part of me that sees it so fitting, as women and feminists who are so central to the collapse in the West will pay the heaviest price, being stripped of most, if not all, influence in the affairs of a nation's political decisions, and will be shoved back into their natural roles, but without the protections the Bible prescribes. So back to New York and this new bill eliminating the terms father and mother in legal proceedings. This is more than the typical mental illness of today's Democrat. It is part of an existential threat to normal functioning society. Put simpler, this is part of a larger life and death plan that if you don't eliminate it, it will eliminate you. As I have warned for years, if you don't become part of the movement to eradicate this psychosis, you will have to treat it later as you would a rabid dog, and many will die as a consequence. Okay, folks, well, that's enough to chew on for now. If you are not concerned or afraid, you should be. True Christians need not fear, and true Christians are not easily fooled by the wiles of the devil, and they don't vote Democrat because their platform is everything that God hates, and they also don't vote for Republicans who pretend to be Republican. A true Christian is given discernment, and if you are lacking in that department, you have a lot to consider and think about. Anyway, be alert, investigate, and get engaged. And until next time, I'm Jack Richardson for Jack's Corner.